Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, we are from group 11. Before we begin, we want to introduce ourselves first. There are our members. The first is Erlinda Tri Kusumawati, and then myself, Mila Adinda, and the last Nida Uswatun Hasanah. Now, we are going to explain about our materials. It is psycholinguistics. The first slide will be explained by myself. Okay, definition of psycholinguistics. Next slide. Etymologically, the term psycholinguistic comes from two words, namely psychology and linguistics. As we know, these two words refer to the name of a scientific discipline. In general, psychology is often defined as the study of human behavior by examining the nature of stimuli, the nature of responses, and the nature of thought process before the stimulus or response occurs. Psycholinguistics is a field of study that connects psychology with linguistics. The main goal of a psychologist is to find the structures and processes that underlie the human ability to speak and understand language. So, psychology experts tend to think of psychology as the study of human thought processes and the manifestation that influence human behavior itself. The purpose of studying this thought process is to understand, explain, and predict human behavior. Language in a linguistic context is seen as a sound system that is agreed upon by both parties, common, and is used by humans as a medium of communication. This means that linguistics in general doesn't associate language with another phenomenon. In the beginning, the term used for psycholinguistics was linguistic psychology, and some people called it the psychology of language. Then, as a result of more directed and systematic cooperation, a new science was born, which was later called psycholinguistics. Okay, next slide. Okay, the object of psycholinguistics is language. The linguistics and the studies of linguistics, the structural components of a language. Meanwhile, the object of psycholinguistics is speech process. The psycholinguistic studies language as a process. And then scope psycholinguistics is a relatively new branch of linguistics, an outcome of two-field convergence, theology and psychology. This discipline investigates the following areas. First, language, mind and brain. Second, mental lexicon. Third, language processing. The third, speech generation. The fifth, language acquisition. And then second, language learning, and much more. Okay, next slide. According to Lado, in 1975, psycholinguistics is a combined approach through psychology and linguistics for the study or study of knowledge of the language, language in use, language changes, and things related to it, which are not easily achieved or approached through either of the two sciences separately or independently alone. Okay, next. According to Emon Bach in 1964, psycholinguistics is a science that examines how the use of a language constructs and understands the sentences of the language. Okay, next. According to Langacker in 1973, psycholinguistics is a study of language acquisition and linguistic behavior, especially the psychological mechanisms that are responsible for these two aspects. Okay, and the next slide will be explained by my friends Nida, Uswatun, Hasanah. The time is yours.
Okay. According to Simanjuntak in 1987, psycholinguistics is the science that processes the psychological processes that occur when a person produces sentences and understands the sentences he hears when communicating and how the language skills are acquired by humans. And next, history of psycholinguistics development. Psycholinguistics was first recognized as one of the sciences of linguistic psychology in 1920. Psycholinguistics was declared a new field of science in 1951. After being declared at Cornell University in a seminar, then the results of the seminar were recorded in a journal by Osgood and Sebel in 1984, and First Linguistics by Osgood and Sebel in 1954. Psycholinguistics has developed into a broad disciplinary discipline and has an impact on research methodology. According to Cass in 1992, this development can be divided into four stages. First, the formative stage. The second, the linguistic stage. Third, the cognitive stage. And the last, the psycholinguistic theory stage, psychological reality, and cognitive science. Next, the scope of psycholinguistics. The first one is language. Language is voluntary, symbolic, systematic, and operates in two different modalities, namely spoken and written. The history of the writing process is a product of oral origin. In human life, reading and writing are studied as a consequence of obtaining listening and speaking skills. In communicating, of course, there are differences. The agreement that involves the person speaking, as well as the voice, also determines the communication. And second is oral. Oral language can be characterized by a pronunciation process that involves the communication of a message being conveyed. According to File, verbal has a real characteristic which involves two forms of non-linguistic communication, such as grunting and sighing. Both of these factors influence producing speech. The shape, size, and position of the spoken tool used. Regarding oral usage, which encompasses the tongue, teeth, soft palate of the jaw and nose, the cavity can flex the vocal cords, breathe, and make a sound at the same time.
Okay, I'm going to explain the third one or the last one, communication. Communication is a term for someone when exchanging information. However, language is not the only means of human communication. Examples of communication that do not use language are body language, smiles, expressions, hand signals, and even traffic lights can communicate symbols to road users. The following is a further explanation written by Field. Human beings can convey ideas and feelings using many devices, among them hand signals, facial expressions, body language, nods, smiles, and winks. Observing Field's book that the term covers any means by which two individuals exchange information. While the language is one type of communication, it is not the only one. Next. The main fields of psycholinguistic studies. Okay, next. Psycholinguistic studies are divided into 6 areas, namely, the first one is language processing, the stages and events that are passed when it involves listening, speaking, writing, and reading skills. Second, language storage and access. The vocabulary process is stored in the mind and the form of grammar rules is taken. Third, understanding theory, management of knowledge to be understood. Fourth, language and brain. Neurological activities are by reading or listening, sharing the storage of linguistic knowledge and semantic concepts in the brain, and communicating activities. Noam Chomsky argues that normal children can get their first language. The acquisition of the language is not influenced by intelligence or learning style. According to Lundberg, during childhood, the relationship between the two parts of the brain is still very flexible and can move flexibly. This period is important in the acquisition of the first language. Fifth, language in extraordinary circumstances, language disorders, and brain damage. 6. First language acquisition. Acquisition, the stage for infants to acquire their first language. Next. The scope of psycholinguistic study. The objects of psycholinguistic study are language, mental symptoms, and the relationship between the two. A language that is processed in the human psyche is reflected in mental symptoms. Language is viewed from a psychological aspect, namely the language process that occurs in the brain, both in the brain of speech and the brain of listener. Next. The description of the scope of psycholinguistic studies is as follows. First, object of psycholinguistic study, the brain and language. Brain and language is one of the studies of psycholinguistics as described above. Brain and language are better known as neurology, where there is a relationship between the human brain organs and language, both in the storage, use, and acquisition of language itself. Second one, mind and language. The relationship between the thought and language is one of the highlights in psycholinguistics. As we know that language is a tool for communicating someone's tongue, where the language is our communication tool in everyday life to convey various kinds of ideas, expressions, and feelings to others. On the other hand, we are also required to understand every utterance and utterance conveyed by other people. By seeing this, we can relate the relationship between the thought and language where the language is a human medium in conveying their aspirations or ideas. Okay, next. The last one, aspects of psycholinguistic work. The aspects that are important in psycholinguistic work include, First, competence, language processes in communication and talk. Second, acquisition of language. Third, performance, language behavior patterns. Fourth, verbal association and meaning problems. Fifth, language processes in abnormal people, for example, deaf children. Sixth, speech perception and cognition. And the last one, language learning. Okay, next.
All right, the conclusion about our materials. Psycholinguistics is the study of mental processes that humans go through to speak. Psycholinguistics started from the existence of linguistics experts who are interested in psychology, and there are existence of psychologists who are involved in linguistics. This was followed by a collaboration between linguistic experts and psychologists. Then, psycholinguistic experts emerged as a scientific discipline. Studies that inspire psycholinguistic scope are: first, the process of language in communication and thought; second, language acquisition; third, language behavior patterns; and the last, verbal association and meaning problems, language process in abnormal people. Okay, so that's all about our material. It is psycholinguistic that we have explained by our members. All those we have shares be beneficial for all of us. Thank you so much for your great attention, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.